Thank you all. Can you hear me properly in the back? Okay, good. So, I know some of you must be thinking this zero-touch authentication, is this reality or is this some kind of aspirational statement? So, I spent 20 odd years in the security business trying to work towards making internet authentication easier, especially for large volumes of users like we're having now in the app economy. And I'm really happy to say that not only is this real, we have real customers using it, and I'll take you through that story in just a few minutes. Also, when I talk about consumer trends, I'm talking not only about consumers of social media sites and things like that. I'm also talking about consumer users of enterprise applications, people that log into banks, people that log into trading portals, things like that. Systems that many of you manage for your as part of your daily jobs. So this zero-touch authentication experiment that we done and successfully did, I think will probably inspire you to make authentication easier for all of your users as well. So let's walk through this and see how this unfolded. So what I thought I'll do is I'll go through the experience and the use cases that we achieved zero-touch authentication. And it's a journey. So it's important for me to take you through that journey because at the end of the journey, in some cases, you may arrive at reduced authentication, but not zero-touch. But if you keep at it, then I think there'll be more and more use cases that you can actually achieve zero-touch authentication. So it's important for you to understand the journey. So I'll take you through that and spend the time to explain the nuances and the decisions and the technologies that we use to achieve the results that we did. Then there's this age-old question of balancing convenience and security, and it's always been the case that one has to win or lose. And I think there may be new answers to that question about balancing convenience and security, especially in this age of analytics and mobile, where you have new trends, new technologies, and new business realities to contend with. I mean, users need a certain level of convenience, which is no longer negotiable. And so there may be acceptable balances between convenience and security that you may not have thought of. And then, of course, in the keynotes yesterday, you heard about data being everywhere, about us being unwired. So these things can be used for advantage. And I'll take you through how we might leverage mobility and analytics to advantage to actually achieve maybe zero-touch authentication. And then we'll discuss a little bit about how to make this happen for enterprise users who are consumers, not only consumers, but also employees of institutions. How can we achieve zero-touch authentication for those use cases? What technologies does CA provide to make these things possible? So I throw this award. This is an award that we got in concert with a very large financial institution, HSBC. And I throw this as a proof point of the fact that the end of the journey for zero-touch authentication for us was a huge success, right? And so I will now describe this journey, not necessarily from an HSBC context, but a more broader context of solving a particular use case. So this thing refers to something called CNP, card not present. So this is the use case of you taking a credit card and shopping on the internet with your credit card, and the financial institution knowing that this is really you making the transaction. And the question is, how can we achieve that, and how can we achieve that without burdening the user with more authentication steps and things of that nature? So, and through this journey, we will understand a little bit more about the kinds of technologies that are available, especially in this big data mobility age, and how we can tap into those technologies to solve this problem. So, what's the big deal here? Today, we all shop on the internet. We don't get bothered by extra authentication steps. You go to a merchant, you fill in a basket, put in a card number, and you're done. The problem with that situation is, the thing that gets verified is that the card is good for $40. but it's not verified that the right human is using the card. And that causes various kind of liability issues between financial institutions and merchants. And so in order to solve that problem of ensuring that the right human is doing the transaction, several banks and the card associations, Visa, MasterCard, everybody together came up with the scheme to say, let's interject an authentication step into this transaction where the financial institution has a way of verifying the identity of the user. So you go to the merchant, fill your basket, hit return. The transaction is then sent to the issuing bank, Wells Fargo, Chase, whatever your issuing bank happens to be, for you to then be authenticated by the financial institution, and then the transaction finishes. And all this redirection happens behind the scenes, so you as a user don't see that till the financial institution decides to ask you a question or try to ascertain your identity. And this redirection is done through the user's browser or application, whatever he's using, to do the shopping session. So it carries a bunch of, if you will, footprint of the geolocation, the device information, things like that, as it comes into this financial institution. So the initial deployments, and most of the deployments, early deployments, have been in Europe and in Asia. So that's why most of the people in North America have probably not seen this happen yet, but it is definitely coming to you. It's only a matter of months before the deployment starts in massive scale in the US as well, because it's a question of who has liability in the transaction. And solving that is a really important question. So if you want to know more about all the liability stuff, I'm happy to discuss that offline. But let's discuss right now what is the security ramifications here. So the initial reaction, the initial setup for this thing was, let's ask the user a password, a banking password of some sort, when the transaction comes down to the bank. So you are at buy.com, you're buying something, transaction gets redirected to the bank, your bank asks you a security question, type in a password, internet password, internet purchase password. Well, you don't have one. So you have to go set up one. So then you have to go register. Then you have to answer mother's maiden name. You have to do all these kinds of stuff to actually establish an identity with the bank and then use that for authentication. So that leads to enormous amount of friction. And even if you do go through this process, the next time you come around, you may or may not remember the password. And then now you have to go through an F5P process. All these kind of crazy things happen to lead to friction. Of course, it reduces fraud, but it creates angst for the user, it creates angst for the merchant, generally not good for the system. And the financial institutions are not trying to get to zero fraud. They're getting to an acceptable level of fraud to conduct the business. This is very important. Because trying to get to zero fraud is like saying, Fort Knox is secure. Fort Knox is secure because nobody goes in or out of the place. So that's why it's secure. It's very easy to do that. You can't do that in an e-commerce site which is open for business. So you have to let people in and still manage the risk of them coming in to some business acceptable levels. So we decided to see, how we could solve this problem. So one solution was to say, let's not have the user remember any passwords. We will send him or her an SMS message, and it'll be a dynamic password. People will enter that in, and then we'll get over this problem of people remembering stuff. Well, that's an annoyance in itself. Now the bank needs to have the correct phone number, SMSs are not guaranteed delivery, a whole bunch of annoying stuff. So we said there must be a better way. Let's look at all the assets that are available to us in order to solve this problem. And one of the key assets that's available here is the data about the user's past behavior with this merchant and the past behavior with their credit card. So we know, for example, what kinds of merchants that this user shops, the kinds of volumes he shops at. We know times of day that he's shopping at. And because the redirection goes through the user's browser, we now know the geolocation of the user. We also know his device type and so on and so forth. So essentially, this ambient data that you heard today, we have lots of this data available as part of this transaction. So the question is, can we leverage this data in order to make this authentication easier and maybe even eliminate the authentication? So we decided to build statistical models to actually see if he could predict the goodness of the next transaction based upon what we had seen before. Essentially a form of machine learning to say, I've learned from the past behavior, I look at the next transaction, and I'll be able to predict whether the transaction is likely or less, more likely or less likely to be fraudulent. And we had to go through a few iterations, find the right kind of algorithms to use, and we arrived on a neural network model that gave us excellent results. So, for instance, we could get to more than 80% fraud reduction just by inspecting 5% of the transactions. That means 95% of the transactions could be led through without any kind of authentication impediment, if you will, and still have excellent results. So the 5% that we were not sure whether this was a legitimate user, you use some kind of authentication method that you want to do to convince yourself of the legitimacy of the user, and some of those transactions might actually be fraudulent. So this is a very, very fantastic achievement, because it achieves something that all of us have dreamt of, is that the financial institution and the merchant has somehow learned enough about you to know what your behavior is and whether this behavior is consistent with previous behavior or not. And therefore, we can actually improve convenience for this user by just not bugging the user at all. Right? And so the hope was, if you did this, users would actually reward this financial institution, will reward this merchant, and there'll be generally, happiness all around. So let's see whether that happened. So here are the results that we got from this large financial institution. So the whole implementation took about 7 weeks to do. The basket size that the users shopped for was all nearly doubled. So when users used to buy $100, now they buy $200 worth of stuff. They also shop twice as often with the cards issued by this bank. And the amount of fraud reduction over a certain number of time period, 6 months in this case, was actually substantial, $2 million. So we have a case here where we could actually reduce the burden on the end user and achieve fantastic results for the financial institution. So this kind of win-win thing is possible in this app economy because we took advantage of the data that was available as part of this ecosystem, if you will. And so this is a useful tool to go figure out how can you do the same thing for other interactions. When your users use a mobile app, they don't expect to log in 10 times into the financial institution. They want to leave the application logged in. Can you allow such things? Do you want to allow such things? What techniques are there to make those things happen? So those are the kinds of things that I am hoping that this journey will give you the confidence to think through. And then as we look at the tools and products available from CA, maybe the answer will be yes to more of those situations. So let's discuss a little bit about the evolution of consumer authentication. Most people don't realize that when the internet was formed in the mid-90s, it was actually a medium for sharing. It was not a medium for commerce. And it's only when Tahir El-Gamal and others at Netscape started to overlay the SSL fabric that actually the internet became useful for commerce. The interesting thing for those of you who remember those days, in the early days, SSL between you and the financial institution or you and the website that you were going to was not readily settable. You actually had to do things like import keys and things like that import certificates into your browser in order to make this thing happen. So this was clearly a big impediment for progress. And one very significant step happened in order to eliminate all this friction and make the internet shopping experience and internet commerce experience possible. And that was a deal that VeriSign struck with Netscape to actually embed the root certificate of the VeriSign CA into the Netscape browser. So this was the deal that Straton Sklavos struck with Homer at Netscape. And that actually changed everything, because now the browser was ready when it started up to do SSL, and you, the human being, didn't have to do anything. The pipe between you and the financial institution or the website was already secured. I mean, there are two fundamental problems on the internet from a security point of view. One is to make sure that you have a private communication mechanism between yourself and the financial institution or the medical institution, wherever it is that you're going, or your enterprise, for instance, and to make sure who's at the end of the pipe. So this SSL automation actually solved this problem of making sure that you have a private communication. The SSL, who's at the end of the pipe situation was more complex, because SSL allowed for the same certificate technology to be used, because X509 was already built, Diffie-Hellman was already invented in 1976, RSA was available. So it's not that the technology was not available, it was not in a usable form. So we had to resort to the same mechanism of using passwords and things like that. So we went from passwords and we said, okay, passwords may not be good enough. We will do some kind of, complex passwords, or we will, establish some kind of rules to actually go complement these passwords, things of that nature. Basic rules, are you coming from a country I don't like, or a region I don't like? Have I seen you 14 times today? That kind of stuff. But I think the real end of the journey, of course, we had smart cards, we had tokens that actually change themselves every few minutes, all these kinds of things. And along the way, I actually built a company that did strong authentication along these lines, but all in software. So there are many of these steps that were taken to make the authentication easier. But the real nice endpoint to get to, as I illustrated with this example that we did on the shopping experience, is to actually get to a personalized experience. So if you can actually get to the personalized experience, then you can dial in the amount of authentication that you need in order to convince yourself that your business risk is being met and that you can tolerate the amount of risk that you want. So you can go ZeroTouch, you can have a lightweight password, you can do all these kinds of trade-offs if you actually have a way of personalizing the user's experience. And you have to, in fact, my thesis is that you have to get to this personalized experience, otherwise you cannot offer services at the pace and the usability convenience at which customers will demand it. Even your internal users will demand those. So that's the thesis. I mean, if you don't do the right things because of the age that we are living in, there will be rewards. So in the banking space, there were lots of banks that had complex passwords. You had to change it every 30 days. You had to have this kind of character, that kind of stuff. Even some financial institutions, even in the US, actually allowed you to use tokens. They actually sold tokens. All that was a clear, dismal failure. And so most banks today allow you to use this reasonable password, and they do a lightweight risk analysis to say, Ram, I expect you to be in the Silicon Valley. I see you in Las Vegas, so maybe I'll send you an SMS to your phone and actually enable you and authenticate you. So I think the consumer-facing websites that many of you are managing for your institutions are actually trying to walk towards an authentication mechanism that is meaningful. But within the enterprise, we are still doing the same things that we did 10 years ago and not really catching on to this game. And the theory that the enterprise user is somehow somebody that you can flog and you have to only love the consumer user, I think is a dead notion. So, and for the main reason that consumerization of IT is already here. So there is really no difference between your employee user and the consumer that's coming to your website, either through an API or voluntarily through your website in order to conduct a transaction. And the extent of it's not only that they want a convenient experience, they want a delightful experience. So the bar is actually being raised, even by internal users. I don't want to have apps on my phone that I want to log in 10 times. I want to make sure that I can actually log in once, and you, the enterprise, understand that I'm still within the four walls of the enterprise. I'm on a private network of the enterprise. Don't ask me for passwords. Let me go do my stuff, right? Mobile devices, of course, are here. Wearables, all this kind of, and of course, the availability of data and the techniques to deal with the data are all here. So we have an opportunity here to embrace the consumerization of IT and actually make life easier rather than fear BYOD and fear all the consumerization of IT. It's a mindset issue. It's an issue of trying to figure out whether these are tools that you can use or these are barriers for you to overcome. So for instance, I would argue if you have a phone in your hand, in your user's hand, that's a very advanced device. It can do all kinds of computations. It can do heavy cryptographic computations. So you might actually leverage that for doing a cryptographic calculation rather than relying on a token that's actually doing a random number or a near random number every few seconds. Because the only token that the user really cares about is the phone. And the phone is so personal that if the user is not in touch with his phone, he knows about it within minutes. And so we should take advantage of that and actually get rid of all other tokens that are actually burdensome and expensive and all these kinds of other things. The other thing is we have all kinds of data. Let's use the data, let's use the mobile, and let's go figure out how we can make life better. Apple Pay is one good example, right? Apple Pay is here, you can take the phone, you can tap and pay. Why do you want to carry your wallet anymore? There's ways of rethinking this whole consumerization of IT for enterprise use. So this balancing of security and convenience. So let's think about that for a second. In the consumer world, in the example that I gave you, the balance was not only about convenience and security, it was about the business of the bank. If the bank stopped a transaction, which happened to be legit, let's say, the bank actually lost an opportunity to make money. So it's the top line growth of your institution that is actually dependent on making sure that you allow all of the legitimate users in as much as you can. I think Mike Gregoire said this yesterday. Security is all about allowing more people in rather than trying to keep people out. And I allow all the legitimate people in. How many people can I get in so that I can make some money out of this interaction and provide value, of course, for the user that's coming in. So that's the balance. The balance is not only about convenience and security. It's about your business now, and especially in the app economy, it's about allowing more and more people in and trying to figure out how to make that possible. And the way to tilt this balance is to use technology. So not everybody can do this. You need the right partner to actually go make this tilt the balance in your favor. So this analytics example that I gave you, if the analytics was not done right, the amount of false positives that would show up would be crippling. So if the legitimate users were being stopped and the fraudster was still being allowed, you will have your call center go light up like a Christmas tree, and you will have a fraud rates go through the roof. So you wouldn't have achieved any advantage with the zero-touch authentication. So you have to make sure that the technologies that you're using are actually fit for purpose. So if you want to make the phone be an extension of the user, then you have to have the technologies to manage keys and all kinds of other cryptographic entities on the phone. You have to make sure that they're secure. You make sure that they're easily provisionable. The ease of use of these credentials on the phone are right. And so you need that kind of technology balance. And that's what CA has spent the last several years doing, is to build these kinds of technologies that actually provide the building blocks, if you will, to get to near zero-touch experience, or actually a zero-touch experience in the use case that I just outlined. And these patterns are all in mobility, in big data, in key management, and the like. So let's look at some of these. So let's take mobility, for example. So one of the key inventions that we have in mobility is the ability for you to store software credentials securely on the phone. So with nearly the same protection mechanisms as hardware. And that means that now you can rely on the keys that you put on the phone to be a representation of the user. This requires breakthrough cryptographic inventions and again, all standards-based technology so that you can interface with the right parties, but the key protection mechanisms are private and nearly equal to a smart card that you might carry, right? So you want to make sure that's available. Once that's available, you can do several things. You can make the phone into a dynamic password generator. You can do other things like have the phone read a QR code on the user's screen and actually communicate to a server by the cell network and magically transport the user to the website that the user was trying to go to. The user doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to type anything into the website. He doesn't have to do any of that stuff because the user's credential is on your phone, and you can leverage that credential on the phone to actually make these things possible. There are several other capabilities available on the phone. For example, you as an enterprise can actually figure out the person that's communicating to me on this phone, what's the phone number of this person? So you might be able to extend more policies or more advantages or more openness. You might be able to exhibit more openness to this user if you knew this was a phone that was actually registered to one of your employees. It might even be a phone that you provisioned, or it might be a BYOD phone, doesn't matter. All these capabilities are possible because you are a compute device that can do and talk intelligently to a backend. It's not just a token that is disconnected from the backend. We have interactive authentication. So one of the things that irks users the most is you send some information on the phone, then they have to transpose the information on the phone to some other thing, some other website or some other application. Look here and type those 6 digits somewhere else. That is the most annoying thing that man can do to another man, is to make this thing happen. So I just detest that. But you can actually solve that problem by sending an interactive communication to the phone, where all you need is the user's response to say, yes, I'm okay with this transaction. Are you trying to log into SharePoint? And then say yes, and then let the user go and do whatever he's doing. So there are ways of actually leveraging the environment that we have not thought about because we have not challenged ourselves to do that. But I think it's important. The Nike gentleman on the panel today was saying, apply to Nike, we are hiring. You don't want your users applying to Nike and working at Nike. You want to keep them working for you. So if you want to keep them working for you, you need to provide an environment where they can actually thrive and not worry about silly IT issues getting in the way of being productive. So I think these kinds of technology solutions are here today and possible. We are demonstrating many of them right here in the conference center, and you can actually see how you can open a door, how you can do proximity. Why do I need to lock my screen and unlock my screen when I leave? My phone, when I walk into the room with my phone, my PC should automatically know that I'm here and be able to allow me to go conduct my business. Smart containerization, BYOD is a great example. When you actually go and allow people to bring their own devices, the standard IT reaction has been, let's put all the enterprise content into one bucket, and it's a walled garden. And if you want to play, Facebook games with your child, you go into a different garden and you come back into the enterprise garden. This is so 1980s thinking, because that's not what the user wants. The user wants one interface into which he can go and do his Office application, or he can do Facebook application, whatever it is that the user wants to do, and you need to be able to discern what is the right thing to do. So, for example, getting email, which is one of the biggest content sharing applications in an enterprise. Most enterprises have chosen to say, let's encrypt all the email, and we use a special email tool to go look at this email. Now, the first thing is trying to compete with Apple on usability applications on an Apple device, and saying that you can build a better email reader than Apple is an IQ test. So I think that's the first level of problems. The second level of problem is most of the communications are benign. Let's meet at the coffee shop for a coffee this evening. That email doesn't need to be encrypted, doesn't need to have all this extra overload put on it. So if you can actually use DLP technology and actually figure out which emails are sensitive, which are not, then you can let most of the 95% of the emails that are benign, you can let them go and be viewed on the iPhone or iPad or whatever device, the Google, Samsung device, and be able to see without any interruption. And the corporate finance documents that are being shared, those of course need to be encrypted, and you can actually go and force an authentication step in order to open them. So this kind of smart containerization allows you now to get to zero touch for many of your enterprise applications which are otherwise not possible. Again, all of these are solutions that are available today and are demonstrated here on the floor and in many of the conference sessions. So in analytics, the same kind of things. We have real-time predictive analytics possible. We have risk scoring engines that can actually score a particular transaction in real time, because users are waiting for actions. It's not some batch thing that you're thinking about whether should I ship the funds to Mexico or not. The user is waiting for action right now, and we have the technologies to make such things possible, right? Auto baselining, things like that are very important. Is this something that you want to worry about? Is it within the baseline of what you expect to happen for this user? If it's outside the baseline, then you need to go do something about it. So on and so forth. And here's a list of some of the products that actually CA provides that incorporate many of these technology areas that I spoke about. So risk analytics, transaction services, mobile app management, content management, device management, all these kinds of products. They're all available here, and they're all usable. We have advanced authentication products available here. We can show it to you today. We are also demonstrating, for example, the equivalent of tap and pay. So it's not only enterprise-focused applications, but also consumer payment-focused applications that are possible with the kinds of technologies that I've outlined here. Key protection technologies, the analytics technologies. These go hand in glove. So you can dial the convenience and the risk tolerance that you want to play. Right, so if you want to use a Samsung phone to tap and pay, you can actually see an early preview of how such a thing would look like back in right behind you, actually in the payment section. Right, good. We also already talked about email. So zero touch can really transform the enterprise. I'm convinced of it. It all depends. We are only limited by our imagination and the challenges that we are picking up. When BYOD first happened, the reason corporations embraced BYOD was because the CEO was walking into the CIO's office to say, I want to use my iPad and my iPhone. Find a way to make that possible. And we found a way, right? So I think that's the real story here. And I think we need to make sure that we challenge ourselves to go do that. So many of the use cases, for example, analytics is the great use case for threat detection. To actually do SIEM type activities, to actually go figure out whether a particular transaction is conforming, not conforming to a security provision, to provide universal access. You can decide, for example, if I'm in the corporate network, everything is open to me. The moment I go to Starbucks, you actually do something different. And the users understand that. But you want to make sure that you have that ability to do zero touch where possible. We are showing proximity-based building access here. So those are interesting things. Tap and pay, so on and so forth. I saw a neat application of wearing glasses. So if you want to actually send messages to my phone, it'll be good for the message to actually be displayed on my Google Glass. So I don't have to read my phone and type it in. I can actually read the dynamic number on my Google phone, Google Glass, and type it in. Much more easier user experience. So on and so forth. So there are ways, if you actually start the journey of doing zero touch, you will find that even if you don't achieve full zero touch on day one, you will actually remove so many hurdles from your user's path that users will actually become more appreciative of the work as we as IT professionals and security professionals are doing in the marketplace. So call to action. I want to say a great story here. The interesting thing is, my daughter just started work this summer, and dad was still paying her bills, so she didn't bother cashing her paychecks. And so my wife was on her, screaming at her for being irresponsible. So I told the kid, hey, why don't you go check the banking app and see whether there's a way for you to use your banking app to deposit your checks. 15 minutes later, all the checks were deposited, right? So can you imagine the conversation at JP Morgan Chase? I think it was the first that rolled out the click and deposit capability from the phone, where they said, let's allow people to take a picture of their check and deposit it. I'm sure there are many risk managers in that room that said, get the hell out of here, go walk in the sunlight. But today, that is, the whole mobile app has been rearranged to make this the topmost action inside the app, right? That's only because somebody said there must be a way to do that. The user convenience is paramount. I will go find a way to rejig the security and the tolerance capabilities to allow these things to happen, right? So that was very important. So I think in the same way that when we did the deal with HSBC and other financial institutions, we actually leveraged data, and we made a conscious attempt to say, let's not go down the traditional path of asking more passwords and dynamic passwords. Let's find the other way. Let's leverage analytics. I think the same kind of things are now possible in enterprise use cases. QR codes are a great way. Proximity sensors are a great way. Smart containerization is a great way. So let's go find those things and find ways to actually make our end users and our employees' lives much better. Thank you. Happy to take questions. There are also a bunch of other interesting sessions. I just put them up here. They reference many of the products that I displayed or I talked about. So you're welcome to go attend them if your schedule permits.
Hello. There are two ways that you can ask questions. The mobile app is working, so if you go into interactive and click on participate and Q&A, you can send that through here. Or Kathy is nice enough to do her running up and down the aisle if anyone has live questions. Let's see what we've got. Anything live? Okay, actually we've got a question on the app. What are the most common apps for applying mobility and analytics in an enterprise IT environment?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I didn't hear it properly.
What are the most common apps for applying mobility and analytics in an enterprise IT environment?
One of the common apps?
What are the most common apps? Sorry.
Yeah. I think it depends on the data that you are looking at. So, for example, one of the great use cases that we are displaying here is mobile app analytics. So you want to figure out, for example, it's very easy to write a mobile application. It's very hard to get a 5-star rating on the App Store. So if you want to get the 5-star rating on the App Store, you want to make sure how is the user using the app? Is he really clicking the right buttons that you expect him to click? What is the heat map of usage? Are there problems in this app? And can you look at the usage map, if you will, and even predict problems that might happen if the app is not remedied or fixed or redesigned? So that's mobile app analytics is one of the great examples, and that's being shown in which center? The mobile app analytics. Where are we showing it? In the Management Cloud Center. So if you want to go take a look at that, you could see it there.
Could an enterprise use its own analytics database, or should enterprises join a consortium for richer data?
I think in analytics, more information is actually a good thing. So if there is some way to actually get, for example, if there are banks working in Sweden, they love to get together and share data among each other. So the bad guys are cooperating, right? And I think it's time for the good guys to cooperate. So if the good guys can cooperate and share information, I think we might be able to defeat the bad guys for once. So yes, I think sharing is a good thing.
What are the key challenges using predictive analytics in an enterprise IT environment?
I think key challenges. I think the it's analytics is a craftsman's game. It's very easy to do bad analytics, where you actually don't get the desired results. You get for example, in my example that we gave with HSBC, you could get false positives. You could not achieve the kind of fraud reduction you want. So it's really a craftsman's game. So you want to make sure you partner with somebody that has the bench strength to actually help you with your analytics. It's not a part-time job. Bruce Schneier once told me a great story about security, which actually helps applies here in analytics as well. He said everybody that read applied cryptography thought that they were a cryptographer, right? And you can't become a cryptographer like that. Similarly, just by reading Revati's book or reading an analytics book, you cannot become a data scientist. That requires craftsman type skills. So I think it's better to partner with companies such as CA that have the skill set to actually work with you and solve your particular problem.
And one more. Let me find it here. What are some future business apps that will emerge from this confluence of mobility and analytics?
Gee. I'll be going and building them. So I think the API as APIs get opened, lots of applications are going to be built in ways that we cannot even imagine. Today, for example, we go and book our airline seat by going into the airline reservation systems. 5 years ago, you would not even be remotely allowed to log into that kind of a backend, right? So I think the ability to actually get into disparate systems. You can log into ADP today, pay them $5 for an API call, and probably figure out what is the average pay scale in your zip code, and figure out whether you're getting paid enough or not. Right? So there are lots of these kinds of applications that will come up, and you may have to figure out a security and authentication disposition towards these kinds of ad hoc type interactions. So I think those kinds of applications will need some kind of analytics capability to go figure out how do you balance the risk and the reward for those kinds of open APIs, if you will. That might be a good fertile area to work in.
Any other questions out in the audience? Okay.
Well, I'm around here in case you have more questions. Feel free to reach out. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.